Our next presentation deals with building your e-commerce measurement playbook. Our speakers are Keith Anderson, SVP Strategy and Insights for Profitero, and Justin Belgiano, VP of Digital Measurement for Nielsen. Gentlemen, the podium is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. This is Justin Belgiano. It's great to spend the next 45 minutes with you talking about this topic about not only digital measurement and how to accomplish it, but really how to build a playbook and the essential ingredients for a holistic approach. I've been with Nielsen for over a decade. I spent my career around CPG companies, and my role in digital measurement is working with our manufacturing clients. So not only to understand what they need to accomplish and listen to them, but also as we build and develop a suite of solutions to enable that. And really looking forward to this time.
Thanks, Justin, and this is Keith Anderson with Profitero. First, thank you very much to John and Linda for organizing another great virtual event. I think this is the fourth or the fifth that we participated in. And you know, we always catch some of the other sessions because the content is fantastic. So thanks for the continued organization of these. My role at Profitero is to lead product strategy and the analyst team that supports our clients. Most of my background, like Justin's, is in retail and consumer products for almost 15 years at this point. And most of that has been focused on e-commerce and the impact technology is having on retail. And I think as you take a look at what I'm sure all of us are experiencing or observing, even on today's agenda, it's clear that e-commerce is driving most of the growth, potentially all of the growth in our industry. Per the Cambridge Group, which is a Nielsen consultancy, 100% of the total retail sales growth last year came from e-commerce. The growth rate of e-commerce compared to the overall industry growth rate is 3 to 1. In other words, low single-digit year-over-year increases in total retail sales, mid double-digit increases year-over-year in online sales. And it doesn't mean that e-commerce is going to make brick-and-mortar retailing irrelevant. It's not. It doesn't mean that stores are going away. They're not. But if you look at the share that e-commerce has of all retail today, it's still comparatively small. $9 and $10 approximately of all retail sales happen in store. And as the data on the right shows, an even smaller percentage of CPG products are being purchased online. But while some people might look at that current and potential state of the landscape and say, well, that means it isn't happening or it won't happen, based on my observations and analysis in the industry, I would tell you it's just starting. And a lot of what we see today is accelerating, even as the scale of retailers like Amazon continues to grow faster than even the e-commerce landscape. Certainly as brick-and-mortar retailers, or historically brick-and-mortar retailers like Walmart, acquire new technology and capabilities and talent and make the statement publicly that they're evolving from a brick-and-mortar retail company to a commerce company that does a lot of commerce online. Kroger, I think when I did the version of this lead conference with this audience, we said, boy, Kroger is a little late to the party. I don't think anybody can say that at this point. So there's very little question in my mind whether it's going to happen. And candidly, among the brands that we work with and talk to, that question has long since been answered. The shift is now, considering that it's happening, how do we plan and execute and ultimately keep score? And I think the name of this conference series really reflects the work that brands, large and small alike, are doing.
I think one of the reasons that this playbook becomes so important about how we plan is when we take a look at the consumer context of it. Right. And one of the things, obviously, that we're trying to get a good gauge on and continue to monitor is what is consumer aperture, especially for consumer packaged goods that are sold online. And we've seen, obviously, a pretty big jump over a 2-year period in terms of folks that would like to buy and folks that now intend to buy. But if we look at things like 9 and 6% and 15, and yet sales are still 2 and 3%, there's a gap between what consumers are open to and what they're doing. And it's more than just reported and observed behavior. I think this actually belies an idea of there are barriers and opportunities that consumers are encountering when they go to buy online that we as an industry need to resolve, both as manufacturers and as retail partners, to create an environment that meets what consumers are looking for so that we can actually match their aperture and willingness to buy online with an experience, right, and an opportunity that consumers will actually convert and move online. Now, and this isn't just impulse purchase, it's the way we encounter the shelf, it's the way we understand incrementality and trips, and we have a real big opportunity to close these things. It's encouraging that more and more people are looking online, and as consumer brands, meeting that need, and as a consumer retailer, meeting those needs is going to capitalize on this growth, and it's something where collaboration is going to make a big difference for us.
Yeah, I think intuitively there's not necessarily news in this simplified view of the landscape, but over the span of decades, most companies, whether retailers or brands, have thought in terms of channels and organized their teams and activities in terms of channels and measured in terms of channels. So we had the grocery channel, and we had food, drug, and mass, and we had clubs and discount and military and all other. And there was a time when e-commerce sat in all other, or alternative. The reality is shoppers have needs, and they're meeting those needs with increasing choice and flexibility. And there's been a decoupling of the point at which a shopper discovers or becomes aware of or considers what to buy, and when they actually buy, and ultimately how they receive the product, whether it's delivered to their home or they pick it up at a store or a pickup point, or they do it old school by driving themselves to the store and doing all of the work themselves. But the key is it's increasingly risky with each passing quarter to view the world through a purely traditional lens because at the margins we see incredible growth, and I think any brand, particularly market-leading brands, have seen a very similar dynamic, which is growth is not coming from the same sources, the same shoppers that it may have historically. And so on the front end, having a point of view about where to play is going to be really key, and measuring and managing to this new reality is really key. And we've heard a lot from our respective clients. Certainly I can speak on behalf of a lot of the folks we work with at Profitero, and Justin speaks with folks across the industry every day as well. We have heard unanimously that everyone understands they need a view of total online performance. In other words, not just one retailer, all retailers. Certainly some retailers are larger or faster growing or account for a more meaningful percentage of current volume than others. But there are strategic relationships with a lot of retailers that necessitate having a point of view on how they're performing. And what's really important is not having a number, but having a number or the number that is not just complete, but accurate and comparable. And so a lot of the questions we hear are all about what's the integrity or what's the accuracy of the data, and that comes down to methodology. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I think relatedly, everybody understands that it's not a channel-centric world anymore. And so people don't want a totally different approach to measuring digital or online than they have for their traditional or brick and mortar businesses. They want visibility of consumers' interaction with their brand holistically, online and offline. And they also understand that as time has gone on and the scale of e-commerce has grown, just knowing how big it is or how quickly it's growing or your starting point isn't enough. In other words, you've got to not only know once a year or once every couple of years the size of the prize and how quickly it's growing. You've got to know, how can I outperform today? How can I outperform tomorrow? And so just as in the brick and mortar world there was a huge emphasis, and still is, as you've heard today, on understanding the retail environment, the physical retail environment, analytics that give brands a point of view on how they're presented and how they're performing at the digital shelf gives folks just incredible power over their own destiny. There's no question speed and simplicity matter. Abundance of data is not going to solve the industry's challenge unless the analytics drive better insight and the insight drives better decisions and more action. And finally, Justin, maybe you can expand on this one, but I think everybody can see that there's exponential change, not just on the horizon, but today, and that a lot of the innovation is coming from unfamiliar models, unfamiliar brands, and there's increasing pressure on companies with really long and strong heritages to match the pace that's being set by some of these emerging players.
That's right, and it requires a different set of operations and processes, and even understanding and forecasting and modeling to match that rate of innovation. Because a typical brick and mortar innovation schedule with all of those barriers to entry is not there anymore. Those same processes will not allow us to succeed. The great part is the tools are there to do it, and allows innovation to finally capitalize on what everyone wants, which is to speed that cycle up of test, learn, fail, and relaunch. And there's certainly an opportunity to do that. So if we think about these challenges, one of the things that becomes a very basis for understanding the online and offline accurate comparable comes to the idea about sizing the real opportunity and understanding that. A couple ideas of how we think about that. One is, there can be a tendency when we talk about channels and e-commerce that we set up teams and centers of excellence and then we focus. And the e-commerce folks are over here thinking about e-commerce, and category managers are over here thinking about other categories and channels. And what we really do need is a holistic, and you'll hear us bring this word up over and over again, to assess the total market, because consumers aren't thinking about channels, they're thinking about stuff they need to get and how they're going to get it. So if we can assess the total market with something that we know is representative and gives us a full and complete picture, not only of our important retailers, but of everything, it's going to lead to better category forecasting models. And we know not only if it has to do with analysts and streets and performance, but on a quarterly basis to know what that growth is going to be to move there. And a big part of this that I think for most folks it's pretty obvious at this point, but when we think about e-commerce and brand fragmentation, that these things change. Oftentimes I'll hear folks say, we want to get our fair share online. And that's actually a pretty noble goal because shares change dramatically when you go online, and that can be different between Amazon and between something like Walmart.com, et cetera. And it's not enough then, if we're just thinking about e-commerce, to be available and say we just need to be in the channel. Just like today, we distort resources and invest with partners where we're advantaged to win. Identifying consumer demand pools online becomes a really important part to understand the real opportunity. So while volume might be moving on, the specific demand pools for your brands are going to be in particular places, and the ability to see that. If we can assess the whole market, understand how it's growing, and then identify how we grow, we ensure that online is not just a trade-out, it becomes profitable growth, and that becomes very meaningful. So in understanding that, this idea about what is a framework for growth, and how do we see a virtuous cycle to win, and it starts we believe, by a non-zero-sum game, which is if all we're getting is individual partners measuring their own little piece of the world and bringing that back to you, it leaves an incomplete picture. And so what we want to do is build a connected partner system that is talking to each other, working together so that you can get an integrated view of the world and be assured that what the data that's getting back and the information and the insights are working together. For us, when we think about this cycle, there's a simplistic view, which is, hey, Nielsen and Profitero and Brambeck and Cambridge Group can help do some of those things. But Keith, I'd love for you to talk through kind of this cycle and how that works.
Yeah, I think having worked with a lot of brands for the better part of a decade on e-commerce, I can tell you 80% of brands have made the decision they're going to do e-commerce, and now they're essentially working through balancing strategy and structure. And strategy is all about prioritization. Where is there the highest and best opportunity commercially, whether it's certain retailers, certain types of retailers, certain categories within their portfolio, and just look at the last 2 quarters of developments in the market. You see some M&A activity that it is helping incumbent players in the market play in a new category, often an adjacent category, or with a new business model, or in a new shopper segment. So in a period of dynamic change like this, there's a lot of energy going into defining what the strategy needs to be. And following deciding what to focus on is a pretty deep assessment of, do we today have the organization and the capabilities and tools that we need to go execute to win? And so these are decisions that are in a small way made continuously, hiring and selecting partners and that sort of thing. But in a large way, it's all about defining what is the organization that we need to win. And if you've got a clear vision and strategy and you've got the right organization and tools and capabilities, then it comes down to execution. And we mentioned things like digital shelf analytics, but this would encompass everything from just your basic 4 Ps execution, or 5 Ps, plus anything that's new and distinct to the new retail landscape. And so it is about making sure that you're discoverable when people search for you. It is about making sure your product content is complete and accurate, and things that we'll mention briefly. But at the end of the day, it's just about executing and driving performance every day. And in the end, you've got to have a scorecard. You've got to know whether you're winning or losing. And so how you define success on the front end of this whole process is really key, and how you measure success is essential to knowing where you stand, not only in the big picture, but all the time. And so this is work that I think every brand is going to need to do if they're not already. And as Justin highlighted, what I get excited about is that there are specialists that sit within this circle here, but unlike anybody else I've encountered, they work together. It's integrated, it's aligned, it's harmonized, and there's a lot that is there's a lot of power in having data and analytics and execution in a closed loop cycle the way that it's starting to come together.
And if we think about, so we've got a cycle and we have strategy and structure and how we do that, we'd like to turn a little bit and make it a little more tangible. So how do we see these pieces fitting together? So what we'll do is pose some questions of what you ought to be able to answer and what you want to be able to pursue. And we think about this in terms of understanding your performance, your shoppers, and your growth. And when we think about performance and we look at sales in that measurement aspect, we think about this in 2 ways. One is I need to very broadly understand my total U.S. e-commerce sales in context with all of my other sales, and I need to see it very broadly across all retail channels and partners. Okay, but for every individual brand, there are retailers that are too important to only look at a broad level, and you need to be able to go very deep and execute at a very deep level and measure those. And that both of those become really important on understanding your performance. Now, if all we know is performance, we've introduced more data into the marketplace and we can measure, but if we can't explain the why, the how, and move to action, then we're going to leave ourselves pretty wanting. And so you've got to be able to then shift and understand the shopper piece, right? And we think about this of not only what is their behavior, what are they online, but really this is about omni-channel, right? Because no shopper shops in a single channel. So I need to understand what the online effect is offline, what's the incrementality of trips, penetration, buy rate, so that you can then hone those dials in to make sure that we know it's not going to be 100% incremental. It can't be zero. Where does it need to be? The only way you get that is by looking at both environments for those same shoppers. And then lastly, if we understand that, we've got to move to growth. So how do you activate your teams within your organization to actually go and make those changes? And this is when we talk about digital causals, right? Getting and understanding the causals of drivers, being able to see those in near real time and influence them on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. It's all of those together that drive to execution that give you a holistic picture. And if we only look at one pillar or another, we won't get there. So when we think about performance, we talked about this, about total e-commerce measurement. And of course, this is what Nielsen as an organization is committed to. So how do we give projected sales for the total United States so that you know total e-commerce volume for my brands, my categories, and manufacturers at that level. And then but I need to know Amazon. Right now, it's making up 40% of consumer packaged goods sales. I need to see that very in depth down to a SKU level. And we partner with Profitero. When we think about shoppers, we talk about digital shopper fundamentals and using online, offline convergence of blended data to really get shopper insights. And then, of course, for this activation piece, I can say this, I'm not Keith, but what I believe to be best in class is understanding the digital causals by using Profitero's digital shelf platform. It's about understanding and activate and blending these things together. So we'll try to bring that to life a little bit, and we'll talk specifically right now about Amazon and how we think about that. Okay, so on the next slide, we say, hey, we need to see Amazon in context.
Justin, do you mind advancing the slide? I don't know if it's just my connection, but it's been frozen on slide 13 or 12 rather.
There we go. Yep. Okay.
Thanks.
So if we think about zeroing in on Amazon in particular, there's this idea about I need to understand it in context and see it in granularity. And this is when you start to see the power of partners working together and doing that work on your behalf as a manufacturer. Okay, so I need to see it in context. I need to see Amazon alongside of all my other retailers with a similar methodology so I can understand volume and understand shopping behaviors at the same time, not only what's actually moving through, but what the response of people are. And that's actually what Nielsen's building to put this together to deliver it in context and give that information as it's needed in an integrated fashion. But that gives context, and we know that we need to get down to the idea of granularity to managing the business. And this is where the partnership with Profitero becomes really important for someone trying to manage that business.
Yeah, and I think as many of you may be aware, Profitero's core capability is the ability to monitor and analyze any retailer's site or mobile application in any country, in any language. So we do that for more than 4,000 sites and apps in 50 countries, 40 languages. Naturally, as I think everybody appreciates, our industry is at a structural situation, not unlike where the brick and mortar landscape was a little over a decade ago, in the sense that some of the key players are opting out of participating or cooperating in models for measuring what's happening in the industry. And so there are methodologies that often emerge to overcome some of those challenges. And building on our capability to collect and analyze data from any retailer site or application, and some of the data scientists that we have in-house with backgrounds from Google and IBM, we developed a methodology that allows us, with very limited inputs, to estimate incredibly accurately item level sales. that are then custom coded by us to align with your data provider, especially Nielsen, and can be aggregated up to the brand or manufacturer or category level and aggregated over longer time scales. So that in itself gives you the comprehensive, comparable, accurate, big picture context with the ability to drill down to see the granularity. And the real key, I think, for the teams that are not only measuring the market but have to go improve performance is that daily item level granularity in the same platform with all of the digital shelf analytics that we offer lets you see exactly how you're doing and immediately and really efficiently see specifically what you can do to improve that performance. And so, I think a lot of what is going to be necessary in the industry over the midterm and the long term is closing that loop between big picture context and then incredibly actionable granularity down to an item, down to a daily basis.
And of course, any one of these pillars would warrant its own few hours. But when we think about then turning from understanding performance to shopper, there's incredibly granular detail that you can get in about conversions and attitudes, behaviors. But at a very broad level, it's very easy to look at one example in terms of we just look at things on a purely demographic basis. Where are they actually online? It's not the same as when I'm offline, or it doesn't necessarily reflect the United States population perfectly. And what's growing down the pipe. And this becomes really important at a very basic level if you're thinking about how do we get grounded in the opportunities for our categories, to look at things like where are boomers as they get online more, right? We have an idea that millennials are doing these things and they're focusing on fresh food and these things. But if I think about boomers, right, it's health and pet care and household care. So it becomes important to not only look at what shoppers are doing today, but what they're going to do in the future. And that begins to give context for the organization from a shopper perspective. So we have ways of looking at performance. There's very high level all the way down to very detailed and intense shopper information to inform the organization about where you go. And then all of this should be driving, as Keith is saying, to activation. Because if we can't get to where all of our resources are moving towards actual activation and growth, we don't push our organizations where they need to go to win for the future. And this is where it becomes important to move on to the idea around growth.
Yeah, and I think what's important for every brand to appreciate is that this is not a switch that gets flipped, and you have to dive in overnight and measure and manage everything with every retailer in every country, by January 2017. It's just not the way that expertise and capability matures. So you do need to do something. You do need to prioritize where to focus. You need to focus on not just where to play, but the activities that will yield the most significant and immediate benefits. And so a lot of the analytics that we offer are oriented towards helping make some of those decisions much more efficiently and much better. Ultimately, I think the key, Justin, if you can advance again for me, I just can't make it. I've lost the powers. Slide 17, Justin, if you're still here.
It should be on 17 if you can see it.
Okay. I can't, but I'll take your word for it. The key is that there are some questions you're going to need to answer once a year, perhaps. Big questions that are going to need a level of alignment and consensus across the organization to inform decisions. There's a cadence of other decisions that's going to come down to a couple times a year, quarterly, monthly. I think the point is the better aligned, the better integrated, the more consistent, the more comparable, and of course, the more accurate your data analytics and insight, the much better positioned you're going to be to go lead in the market, as opposed to suffering from everybody across your organization having their own number to support their own agenda, or a lot of PowerPoint decks or PDFs that don't actually link to any particular decision or action. So at the end of the day, this is not a complete or comprehensive list of some of the things that you'll want to measure. In fact, Justin and I co-authored a white paper that was released recently that we hope you'll go download from either one of our sites, Profitero or Nielsen. But you'll find a lot of insight and perspective there about some of what you may want to measure and how to build a plan for getting started, no matter what level of sophistication you feel like you're at today. So just to conclude briefly, I think we all feel, and we can all see even from today's agenda, e-commerce is a strategic imperative. I think you're going to hear shortly from my friend Danny how to make reviews great again in the online channel, and there's some other great presenters today that will cover even more angles on this important topic. And I think we all have to be as agile as we need to be based on the bar for speed that competitors are setting, but we also have to take a holistic and a comprehensive approach to understanding who shoppers are and how their attitudes and behaviors are evolving, a complete picture of the sales and volumetrics, and finally, a comprehensive view of the transactional environment, which is increasingly digital.
Yeah, and I think this idea as we pursue e-commerce, we're used to a lot of visibility, and in e-commerce there's less visibility today, just like maybe 50 years ago there was less visibility in an offline world. And as we move forward, I think the encouraging, optimistic part of this is pieces that are coming together are giving visibility to understand consumers and what they're doing, and especially what they're doing in the e-commerce world. And as long as we keep that focus and begin seeing these pieces come together, that visibility will give the opportunity to succeed and still provide consumers what they're looking for, when they're looking for it, and how they need to see it in a way that should allow you to win. And hopefully what we've outlined today are ways to think about it, and then of course how you begin to put in solutions to help you actualize that approach in terms of what we do. So we appreciate that time. I think we have just a few minutes left, which we would open up to Q&A for the next 4 or 5 minutes.
Yeah, there was a question that came in, Keith and Justin. How should brands define success in the online channel, and which brands are getting it right?
Yeah, Justin, I can start on that one, and then I'll let you add your thoughts. I think there's a huge bias at many brands, particularly those that have a number 1 or number 2 share position, to define success in the channel as if it were mature and as if the scale advantages they enjoy offline necessarily translate online. So that means there's a bias towards a defensive stance. There's a huge emphasis on profitability. There's big concerns about impacts on channel shifting and all those kinds of questions. And what I usually coach people to study and acknowledge is whether or not your brand is available and well presented. With each passing week, more shoppers are looking for products, whether they've bought them before or not, at the digital shelf. And so I think there's more downside risk of being absent or underperforming, especially as you start where we started today and look at the likely scenario for growth and share that digital commerce will have over the next 5 or 10 years. The longer you stay on the sidelines or underperform, the more exposed you are to what may feel quarter by quarter like a very slow and steady shift. But because the growth is not decelerating as the channel scales, it's the kind of thing that you won't feel until one day you do, and by then it's too late. So I think success is all about, one, having a commitment, often driven by top-down endorsement, that we will play and we will win with digital retailers where shoppers want to buy our brand. There are rare circumstances where a brand may have great reasons not to participate at all, but I'd say 1 in 20 brands fits that profile. And once you've made the commitment to be there, everybody looks for their fair share of the online landscape. If you're a big brand, almost nobody we've ever seen ends up with their fair share, and fair share defined as equivalent to offline share. And I'm happy to share more in a different venue about why that is. But share alone is an important starting point, but it doesn't tell you it doesn't tell you how to win, and whatever benchmark you're using may not be the right benchmark. So I think you've got to define success a little differently, and maybe the most effective way we've seen it is to focus on improving versus your own past performance every day. So you want to benchmark against competition that you know, but more importantly, you want to benchmark against the outperformers who are setting the bar in this environment, and you want to make sure that you're closing the gap with them, not necessarily in terms of share at the outset, but in terms of execution.
Okay, thank you, Keith and Justin. That was excellent. For more information, please visit Profitero.com.